There's a Dutch company whose name very few people in the world know, but whose influence is still felt today. It was founded almost 400 years ago. Its value combined today's Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and even Saudi Aramco, and you still wouldn't come close. When we think of capitalism, names like the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, or J.P. Morgan usually come to mind. But the truth is, they weren't the ones who laid the foundations of this system. The real revolution began quietly in the Netherlands. This story is about the Dutch East India Company, VOC, and the Orange dynasty behind it, which created the world's first publicly traded company, its first stock exchange, and its first initial public offering. It all began with a threat. By the end of the 16th century, Spain had brought Portugal under its control. This meant that two great maritime empires had become a single power. Vast trade networks stretching from Asia to America were now in Spain's hands. For the Dutch, this was a clear threat. They were already fighting for their independence against Spain. Now they faced an almost invincible force. They realized they couldn't win with weapons. Instead, they chose a much more cunning approach, turning money into weapons. VOC, not like a company, but like a state. In 1602, several Dutch trading companies merged to form the VOC. On paper, it was a trading company, but in practice, it was something entirely different. This structure possessed armed ships, could build its own army, signed treaties, and governed territory, effectively ruled over colonies. But its most revolutionary aspect was this: it was open to the public. For the first time, ordinary people could invest in a global project and share in its profits. This was a first in history, a dynasty that gained power through money. At this time, the House of Orange was in an interesting position. They had no king. Their lands were limited. The old feudal order no longer provided them with power. But they realized something very early on. In the new era, what determined power was not the crown, but capital. They didn't directly rule the VOC, but they stood behind it, financed it, and linked their destiny to it. In time, administrators from the Orange family rose to the head of the company and the West India Company. They had no crown, but their coffers were full, and that was more than enough to gain power in Europe. The foundations of the financial world are being laid. The VOC, voluntary company, didn't just conduct trade, it laid the backbone of today's financial system. For the first time, permanent shares were issued. Shares were freely bought and sold. A secondary market, Amsterdam Stock Exchange, was created. The concept of limited liability was introduced. This meant that if a ship sank, an investor only lost the money they had invested. Their home, family, and personal wealth remained safe. The reason we say joint stock company or limited liability company when establishing a company today is precisely because the foundation for this was laid here. The influence spread like ripples. This model didn't stay in the Netherlands. In 1688, William of the House of Orange ascended to the English throne. Following this, the Bank of England was established. Government bonds emerged. Wars began to be financed through capital markets. All were ideas originating from the Netherlands. On the American side, the foundations of New York were based on New Amsterdam, founded by the Dutch. The English captured the city but preserved the Dutch commercial and legal systems because they worked. The collapse was inevitable. By the end of the 18th century, the VOC had grown enormously large, but control had weakened. Corruption, inefficiency, increasing competition, and the cost of war crumbled the company from within. In 1796, the VOC officially ceased to exist and was taken over by the state. But its ideas did not die. The legacy that remains today, the Netherlands is no longer an empire at sea, but it remains a giant player in the global financial world. Companies like Shell are a continuation of the Dutch corporate and legal legacy. And while the House of Orange may seem like a symbolic kingdom, its economic ties remain strong. The dark truth that must not be forgotten. This story also has a dark side. VOC committed massacres against indigenous peoples, established forced labor systems, redemptively exploited resources. The foundations of modern finance were laid at a very high human cost. Final thought, this story shows us this. Power is no longer established with swords but with capital. In the past, kings ruled. Today, it's the markets. So the real question is, who controls the markets? If the crown is not visible, who wears it?